This talk is for Adler Graduate School, course number 511, Introduction to Individual Psychology. Individual psychology therapists renounce all superior authority in their relationship with clients, choosing instead to nurture equality and mutual respect and to develop the social interest of the client. Instead of interpreting the behaviors, feelings, and motivations of a client to them, the individual psychology therapist engages the client in a process I call Hypothesize and Verify, which is engaging the client in negotiations about what is wrong in their life, why it is wrong, and how it could be better. These negotiations come together in a case formulation, and this case formulation evolves over the course of therapy as new information emerges and as new connections are discovered. The individual psychology clinician applies the personality theory of individual psychology to generate hypotheses for the clinical formulation. It is important to have a holistic perspective and to listen for movement in considering the history the client reports, their description of current behavior and relationships, and your experience of the client within the therapeutic relationship. Individual psychology assumes that the same fictional final goal and line of movement will be evident in all of these areas, as well as in the presenting complaint or complaints that brought the client to therapy. Another key assumption of individual psychology is that the core of human distress and neurosis is a poor preparation for the tasks of life, which Adler defined as society, occupation, and love. An individual psychology clinician will be focused on the history and current functioning in these three areas, and hypothesizing poor preparation as an initial hypothesis when difficulties are revealed. Symptoms often safeguard the client from a failure in one or more of these tasks. The poor preparation is often activated by a life event, what Adler called the exogenous factor. Careful inquiry into the onset and reoccurrence of distress and symptoms can also generate hypotheses about the dynamics of the client's distress. Rudolf Dreikurs proposed a technique called points of a line that can be very helpful in generating hypotheses. It relies on inductive and associative reasoning, a process of constructing general propositions from specific examples and noticing similarity among different events that have been observed. Adler described this process in his book, Understanding Human Nature. Quote, "We have made the important contention that the understanding of human nature can never be learned by the examination of isolated phenomena which have been withdrawn from their entire psychic context and relationships. It is essential for this understanding that we compare at least two phenomena which are separated by as great a time as possible and connect them within a unified pattern." End quote. Dreikurs proposed listening for patterns instead of facts in order to integrate seemingly diverse behaviors and beliefs. He uses the metaphor from geometry of 2 points defining a line and asks the question, quote, "What is the possible pattern of thought that would conceivably connect these two divergent facts?" End quote. He emphasizes the tentative nature of the first proposed pattern and encourages his readers to continue to integrate new data in a similar fashion. Once a formulation is proposed, the next step in the process is to verify it with the client. Individual psychology clinicians have found the phrase, "Could it be that?" as a useful beginning of a proposal. This seems to invite the client to agree or disagree and to elaborate, continuing this discussion until there is agreement between client and therapist is very productive and enacts mutual respect between them. In his book, The Challenge of Parenthood, Dreikurs described another type of verifying response by a client, quote, "This reaction is immediate and automatic, a recognition reflex, and indicates the correctness of the interpretation. It consists of a roguish smile and a peculiar twinkle of the eyes, characteristic of the cat who swallowed the canary." End quote. This reaction can be pointed out to the client as a part of the ongoing discussion. In the 1956 collection of Adler's writings, he proposes 7 tests for the correctness of a neuropsychiatric opinion, striving for an internally consistent and easily understood formulation of the style of life. He proposed involving the family physician in the formulation process. He encourages the clinician to look at the whole person, not just the presenting symptoms, and to look for an assumption or a mistaken belief that explains the pattern. Griffith and Powers express this line of inquiry as, quote, "What would have to be true to make an otherwise particular, peculiar, and socially senseless pattern of behavior intelligible?" Adler goes on to suggest understanding the whole person and then seeing how the symptom fits with the pattern of movement. He uses the metaphor of hearing the melody rather than the individual notes, and of the archaeologist putting together fragments of earthenware and tools to understand how each part fits into the whole. The last of Adler's 7 verifying strategies has become known as the question. He instructed the clinician to, quote, "Ask the patient, what would you do if you were completely well? Most certainly he or she will name precisely that demand of society which we would expect him or her to avoid." End quote. Dreikers adapted this question to the assessment of the neurotic nature of a physical symptom and elaborated the inquiry. Quote, "We must always ask him or her to imagine what would happen if we could give him or her a pill that would remove all of his or her symptoms and make him or her completely well as soon as he or she left the office. What would then change in his or her life? What would he or she do differently than before?" Close quote. Again, the answer to this question can reveal what tasks of life are being avoided or safeguarded against. Rich Kopp talked about reflecting beliefs instead of feelings as a way to engage the client in a discussion of the basic convictions part of the clinical formulation. As we will see later in this course, these are the self-concept, beliefs about others, beliefs about the world, ideals, and goals. Finally, an attitude of non-judgmental curiosity is very useful in establishing and maintaining a good working alliance with a client. It is important to keep in mind that you as a clinician are an expert on personality theory and on change processes, but the client is the expert on their life and their psyche.